Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone, perhaps a lover, a friend, a colleague. Their face is calm, their words polite. Nothing seems out of place, but something gnaws at the edge of your perception. A faint dissonance, a micro-expression, a twitch too fast to catch, a tone that doesn't quite match the words. You feel it before you understand it. They're lying or hiding or pretending, and yet you smile back, nod, play your part. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you're imagining things. But later that night, when the silence grows heavy and the masks are off, you realize you weren't imagining it at all. You just didn't know how to see. Now ask yourself, how many moments like this have slipped past unnoticed? How many people have you trusted who never truly revealed themselves? How many truths have been camouflaged behind mannerisms, etiquette, or charm? Worse, how many times have you done the same? The terrifying irony of human life is that we live surrounded by people whose inner realities remain utterly opaque. We assume we know others, that we're intuitive or insightful. But most of us navigate the social world with a blindfold stitched from politeness, projection, and fear. The truth is, every conversation is negotiation of illusions, yours and theirs. And most people never realize the game they're playing. So here's the question that haunts those who dare to look deeper. Can you ever truly read someone, not just their words, not just their habits or likes, but their motives, their wounds, their power games, their unspoken fears, their deeper truth? Nietzsche once warned us, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. But what if the abyss isn't out there? What if it sits quietly behind every polite smile, every social ritual, every handshake? What if reading someone, truly reading them, requires us to stare into the abyss of their psychology, their lies, and their hidden contradictions? Worse still, what if we cannot understand others until we first decipher the monster within ourselves? Think about it. How often do you mask your intentions? How many times do you wear a smile you don't feel, say, "I'm fine," when you're not? Or pretend to agree just to avoid confrontation? If you do this daily, and you do, why wouldn't others? We are taught to seek connection, yet trained to deceive, starting with ourselves. And here lies the unbearable paradox. We crave to be known while building elaborate defenses to prevent it. We long to understand others, yet recoil from what such understanding might truly reveal. Because what if knowing the truth about someone, truly seeing them, means dismantling the comforting narratives we use to survive? What if your best friend doesn't love you the way you thought? What if your partner's tenderness masks unresolved guilt? What if your boss's confidence is a performance of control masking chronic insecurity? And what if you are guilty of the same? This is not about cynicism. It's about vision. Reading someone is not a parlor trick. It's not about decoding body language from a listicle or catching a nervous tick. It's something far more dangerous and far more liberating. It's about piercing through the layers of social camouflage. It's about seeing through the fictions people live by. It's about recognizing the existential theater we all perform in, and sometimes choosing to walk off stage. And Nietzsche understood this better than anyone. His philosophy wasn't about passive reflection. It was a sledgehammer. He shattered illusions not for the sake of destruction, but to make room for something truer, something earned. You have your way, he said. I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist. In this spirit, to read someone instantly is not to possess a map of fixed truths. It is to become a cartographer of shadows, someone who knows how to navigate human nature in its raw, unfiltered form. But be warned, once you learn to read others deeply, there is no turning back. You will see the lies behind pleasantries. You will sense the trauma in anger, the neediness in arrogance, emptiness behind ambition. And you may begin to wonder, was ignorance ever a kind of mercy? So here's the question that should keep you awake at night. What if the ability to truly read others is both a gift and a curse? The answer demands a journey, not a trick. A descent, not a shortcut. You must be willing to lose your illusions, perhaps even your comfort, because to see others clearly, you must first see through yourself. And that journey begins not with answers, but with a mirror. Let's turn it toward you. Look in the mirror, not the glass one, but the psychological kind. What do you see? Most will say, myself. But that word, myself, is already a mask, a persona, a construct. What you see is not yourself, but the story you've been rehearsing for years. A self stitched together from family expectations, social feedback, cultural programming, childhood defenses, and the desperate need to belong. The real problem, then, is not that others are hard to read. It's that we have forgotten how to read at all, because we've never learned how to read ourselves. To read others truly, you must first dissolve the filter you call reality. And that begins with the most dangerous realization, that your perception of others is shaped not by who they are, but by who you are trying to be. Your interpretations, your projections, your assumptions, they are echoes of your internal world, bouncing off the silence of someone else's. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The shadows you notice in someone else are often the very traits you repress in yourself. You call someone manipulative. Are you afraid of your own tendency to control? You sense insecurity in someone's voice. Could it be the resonance of your own self-doubt? Now consider this. When you say someone is hard to read, what you often mean is they don't fit into the script you're unconsciously writing for them. And that script, your script, is rarely original. It's a hand-me-down worldview carved by childhood wounds, reinforced by culture, and rationalized by your ego. Nietzsche had a brutal name for this kind of passive living: slave morality. The condition in which we no longer see people as they are, but as we need them to be, to preserve our comfort, our self-image, our sense of control. Ask yourself, are you truly observing others or simply reacting to how they make you feel? You see someone confident and call them arrogant because their boldness triggers your buried timidity. You meet someone cold and call them cruel because their indifference exposes your craving to be liked. You watch someone withdraw and call them suspicious because their silence echoes your fear of abandonment. In all this, are you reading them or projecting yourself? This is the hidden force that blinds us, ego-bound perception. It's the lens through which we bend others into shapes that suit our eternal drama, and it's insidious because it masquerades as insight. You think you're reading someone, but really you're coloring them in with the past. Schopenhauer once said that a man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. That is, we are not free from our nature, we are entrapped by it. And until we begin to unearth our own subterranean impulses, We cannot hope to discern anyone else's. Every reading will be tainted. So what shapes this inner distortion? It begins early. As children, we are emotional detectives, but without training. We learn to read our caregivers not with reason, but with desperation. A mother's frown becomes our shame. A father's silence becomes our fear. Every unmet need becomes a lens. And these lenses, unquestioned, harden into beliefs. These beliefs become defenses. These defenses become identity. And so, by the time we are adults, we have inherited a warped lens of perception that we mistake for intuition. We think we're reading someone in the present, but we're really navigating the ghost maze of our past. This is why Nietzsche was obsessed with the idea of becoming who you are. It sounds like a tautology. How can you become what you already are? But Nietzsche knew you are not yourself yet. You are a layered fiction. And until you burn away what is not truly yours, you will remain estranged not only from others, but from your own soul. Now consider the philosophical implications. If you are unable to read yourself, your motives, fears, projections, then how can you ever trust your perception of others? You cannot. And that is the hidden problem. It is not that people are inherently deceptive, though many are. It is that you are already deceived before they even speak. You walk into every room with a mind shaped by unresolved wounds, cognitive distortions, emotional fog, and inherited expectations. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, saw this with piercing clarity. Between stimulus and response, he said, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space is the birthplace of true perception, but most people never reach it because they live in reflex. They see a face, feel an emotion, and react. No pause, no awareness, no reading. To read someone instantly, you must lengthen that space until it becomes a landscape. You must observe without judging, listen without needing, perceive without projecting. But how many of us can do that when we are so addicted to certainty? And here lies another psychological trap, the illusion of transparency. We assume others reveal more than they do. We believe that facial expressions are windows to the soul. That tone of voice reveals truth. But research shows the opposite. Human beings are notoriously bad at spotting lies. We overtrust charm and underread discomfort. We believe what we want to believe, especially when it aligns with our emotional needs. This is why so many people are betrayed not by their enemies, but by their lovers. Because love, unexamined, is a breeding ground for illusion. Nietzsche knew this too. He saw through the romantic myth of perfect understanding. Love, he wrote, is a state in which a man sees things most decidedly as they are not. Brutal, yes, but also liberating. Because to read others clearly, you must abandon the fantasy of total understanding. You must stop trying to make people coherent and instead learn to tolerate their incoherence. You must accept that people are walking contradictions. Beautiful, brutal, terrified, pretending, just like you. So what is the root problem in our inability to read others? It is not their concealment, it is our blindness. A blindness crafted not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of courage. The courage to examine ourselves. The courage to live out the comforting labels. The courage to sit in ambiguity, to say, I do not yet know who this person is, and I do not yet know all that I am. And that's where we turn next, because once you see this hidden psychological machinery, once you name the shadows, it becomes impossible to unsee the consequences. And oh, the consequences are vast. You wake up in the morning, brew your coffee, scroll through your phone. A dozen faces pass by, some real, some digital. You nod at a neighbor, glance at a coworker, text a friend back. It all feels normal, ordinary. But something profound is happening beneath that ordinariness. Something dangerous. You're not seeing them, and they're not seeing you. We live in a world thick with masks. Masks of confidence, kindness, professionalism, happiness. But behind them, there are whole universes trembling with fear, hunger, power, longing, shame. And because most people never learn to read others and never learn to see through themselves, those universes remain unexplored. We are strangers, orbiting each other like lonely planets, pretending we're touching when all we share is gravity. This isn't merely a poetic metaphor, it is the silent architecture of civilization. The inability to read others clearly has consequences far beyond social awkwardness or occasional misjudgments. It shapes careers, collapses marriages, breaks friendships, fuels wars. It's in the boardroom, where a leader misreads a competitor's bluff. It's in the therapy session where a counselor fails to hear what isn't said. It's in the courtroom where a jury trusts a tear instead of evidence. It's in the family where a father cannot see that his son's silence is a scream. But let's bring it closer. The true horror is not that we misread others. It's that we build our lives on those misreadings. We marry people we think we understand, only to discover, years in, that we fell in love with an ideal, not a person. We trust friends who later betray us, not because they changed, but because we never saw them clearly to begin with. We avoid certain people, afraid of their energy, only to realize they were mirrors we couldn't handle. And the tragedy deepens, because every time you misread someone, you reinforce the internal script that made you do it in the first place. You see rejection where there is indifference, and you call it intuition. You see flirtation in kindness, and name it chemistry. You take someone's detachment as strength and later call it emotional maturity. But it was never about them. It was about the filter through which you viewed them. This is not perception. This is projection. And projection is a trap, because it always feels like insight. The mind does not like ambiguity. It craves coherence. So it fills in the gaps, creates stories, paints caricatures. It decides who someone is before giving them a chance to be anything else. And the moment you do that, the real person disappears. They're no longer there. You're interacting with your version of them, a ghost. Psychologists call this the confirmation bias, our tendency to seek evidence for what we already believe and ignore what contradicts it. But Nietzsche saw it even deeper, as a metaphysical failure, a failure not of logic but of courage, because to see someone clearly means allowing for the possibility that they defy your categories, that they might be unknowable, that their truth might make you uncomfortable. And most people would rather cling to a comforting fiction than endure that kind of existential discomfort. This leads to what you might call emotional simulations. Think about how often people respond not to what someone said, but to what they think the other person meant. You interpret a pause as judgment, a missed text as rejection, a raised eyebrow as mockery, and you react not to them, but to the story your mind just created. You become upset, defensive, anxious, you spiral. But none of this ever touched reality. And in these simulations, entire relationships are born and die. This is the quiet catastrophe of modern life, the replacement of presence with interpretation. But what drives this? It's not ignorance, it's fear. The fear of being wrong. The fear of being vulnerable. The fear of seeing someone truly. Because if you do, you might have to act. You might have to confront, or leave, or apologize, or change. And so, we choose blindness. Because blindness allows us to stay safe, passive, righteous. Aldous Huxley once observed that facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. Likewise, people do not cease to be complex, contradictory, and painful just because we misinterpret them. They remain, and we suffer, not because they were unknowable, but because we refuse to know them. But it doesn't stop with individuals. Entire societies are built on misreadings. Prejudices are just institutionalized misperceptions. We read skin color as danger. We read accents as intelligence. We read gender as competence. These are not readings. These are hallucinations, validated by culture, cemented by repetition, and inherited as truth. And yet they shape everything. Who gets hired? Who gets punished? Who gets loved? Who gets ignored? Even democracy rests on our ability or failure to read others. Politicians master the performance of relatability. Voters fought not for policies, but for personalities. Charisma is mistaken for competence. Assertiveness is mistaken for truth. And so entire nations are guided not by wisdom, but by theater. But this isn't a call to paranoia. This is a call to awareness. Because once you realize the scale of this unseen machinery, you cannot afford to be passive. The stakes are too high. To walk through life misreading others is to live in a dream where you can never fully wake up. You touch people but never feel them. You talk to them but never hear them. And all the while you are lonely, but you don't know why. You think it's the world, the culture, the pace of modern life. But maybe, just maybe, it's something quieter. Maybe it's that you've never truly seen someone. And maybe no one has truly seen you. And this subtle ache is the consequence of a life lived behind glass. Nietzsche spoke often of the need to become hard, not in the sense of cruelty, but of resilience, to strip away illusions, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts, because only when the illusions are gone can we begin to feel reality with bare hands. The question is, are you willing to endure that exposure? Can you tolerate a life where you see people not as you wish them to be, but as they are? Can you handle the discomfort of their contradictions, the terror of their depth, the rawness of their truth? And can you do it without trying to fix them, label them, or protect yourself from them? Most can't. But if you can sit in the furnace of unfiltered perception without flinching, if you can abandon your need for certainty and embrace the chaos of real seeing, then something rare begins to happen. You begin to wake up, and in that awakening, you glimpse the possibility of a different life. A life where people are no longer shadows or threats or projections, but mysteries. Living, breathing, volatile mysteries. And that perhaps is the beginning of rebellion. It begins not with a scream, but with a silence. The moment you sit still long enough to hear the grinding machinery of your assumptions, the subtle inner voice that labels before listening, that judges before understanding, that reduces before revealing, that silence is sacred. Because in it, a rebellion stirs. You don't need to shout. You don't need to run away. The most radical revolution doesn't begin in the streets. It begins in your perception, in the way your eyes rest on another human being, not as a mirror, not as a threat, not as a tool, but as a question. Who are you beyond what I want you to be? Who are you when I stop needing you to fit my story? This rebellion is not against others. It's against your own conditioning, against the neural shortcuts that categorize people in milliseconds, against the emotional reflexes that hijack your attention, against the lazy certainties passed down by culture, trauma, ideology. You were taught to see in black and white. Now you must learn to see in shadow, in nuance, in contradiction. Because human beings are not clear signals. They are noise. Beautiful, discordant noise. And yet you were told that clarity is truth, that the more certain you feel, the more accurate you must be. But that was a lie. Nietzsche warned us of this. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. Why? Because a lie can be questioned, but a conviction feels righteous. It wears the mask of moral clarity. It silences doubt. And so when you just know what someone is like, you stop observing. You stop listening. You stop learning. To rebel, you must dethrone that certainty. This is not easy. Your brain is addicted to efficiency. It rewards rapid judgments. It wants to know, not to wonder. But wonder is the path. Curiosity is the weapon, and humility is the armor. So what does rebellion look like in practice? It begins with the discipline of not knowing. You sit across from someone, you feel something arise. An emotion, an instinct, an image. But instead of acting on it, you pause. You ask yourself, what part of me is reacting? What part of me is projecting? Is this feeling about them or about me? That pause is your battleground. It's where the rebellion lives. Over time, this practice becomes a way of seeing, a second sight. You begin to notice how often people wear masks, not maliciously but protectively. You see how fear hides behind arrogance, how shame hides behind control, how need hides behind indifference, and you stop being fooled by the surface. More importantly, you stop being frightened by it. You realize that you don't need to decode everyone instantly. You don't need to master them, define them, understand them fully. You only need to stay awake in their presence, to notice, to allow. That alone is rebellion in a world obsessed with speed, with judgment, with mastery. Because we are trained to conquer people with our minds, to figure them out, pin them down, file them away. But what if the real power lies not in domination, but in surrender? Surrendering your preconceptions, surrendering your narrative, surrendering the need to be right about someone. This is not weakness, this is radical strength, because it means you are no longer operating from fear. You no longer need control to feel safe. You can sit in the unpredictable chaos of another human being and remain intact. That is rare. Nietzsche called this state the overman, the one who has transcended societal scripts and invented his own values. But that transcendence begins here. In the moment you refuse to be governed by your inherited perceptions. This rebellion, then, is deeply personal. It doesn't demand that you fix the world. It demands that you see it anew. It asks you to notice the janitor and the CEO with equal presence, to see past charisma, past awkwardness, past status, to resist the invisible gravity of cultural ranking systems that pull your attention to power and beauty while making you blind to depth. And as you practice this rebellion, something astonishing begins to happen. People start to reveal themselves, not because they change, but because your presence makes it safe for them to be real. They feel it. The absence of judgment, the space to contradict themselves, the rare gift of being seen without being sized up. And in that space, masks begin to slip. Armor begins to fall. Truth, messy, raw, sacred truth begins to leak through. You become a kind of mirror, not the kind that reflects a distorted image back at someone, but the kind that shows them who they are beneath the noise. And in doing so, you free them. Not by force, not by insight, but by presence. This is the paradox of rebellion. When you stop trying to read people in order to control them, you finally begin to see them. So how do you train for this? There is no system, no 5-step plan. This is not self-help, it's self-confrontation. But here are some practices for the rebel mind. 1. Watch your language. Notice how often you label people toxic, awkward, needy, manipulative. Each label is a cage. Replace it with a question: what pain might this behavior be protecting? 2. Sit in ambiguity. When you're confused by someone, resist the urge to categorize. Let the confusion be. Let it stretch. Let it teach you to tolerate complexity. 3. Reverse the gaze. When you're triggered by someone, ask, what unexamined part of me are they touching? Often the person you dislike is your unconscious twin. 4. Drop the performance. You can't see others if you're busy managing how you're seen. Practice dropping your mask. It gives others permission to do the same. 5. Seek contradiction. If you believe someone is strong, look for their fragility. If you think they're kind, look for their fear. Not to accuse them, but to deepen your seeing. These are not techniques. They are acts of psychological rebellion, because the greatest power is not the ability to control others, but the ability to perceive without distortion, to see clearly without needing to protect your ego, justify your worldview, or predict the outcome. That clarity is terrifying, because it requires letting go. But it's also the beginning of liberation. Once you see people as they truly are, not as roles or threats or reflections, you begin to see the entire world differently. The manipulative boss is just a terrified child in a suit. The cold friend is drowning in grief. The arrogant stranger is one compliment away from collapse. And the moment you stop misreading them, you stop misreading yourself. Because every person you read is a test of your own clarity. They show you your filters, your needs, your wounds. And if you have the courage to see them, you begin to change. You become someone who no longer reacts, who responds, who no longer projects, who perceives, who no longer fears, who sees. And in that seeing, a new reality opens up. But this is not the end. It's only the beginning. Because once you've broken free from the prison of perception, what's left? What remains when all the illusions are stripped away? What is the ultimate truth, the insight so piercing it changes how you see everything? That is where we go next. You stand at the edge now. The illusions have been peeled away, the false readings exposed, the projections shattered. You see people more clearly. You feel the tremor beneath their voices. You recognize the fear behind their anger, the longing beneath their pride, the deep ache behind their eyes. But something deeper remains, a silence, a stillness beneath the chaos of perception. And within it, an unbearable truth. Here it is, raw and unsanitized. You cannot read anyone perfectly. Not completely, not finally, because there is no final person to read. They are in flux, becoming, evolving, and so are you. All this time you thought the goal was to unlock others, to read them like books, to decode their essence, to pin them down. But the truth, the ultimate truth, is this: there is no fixed self, not in others, not in you. And this truth changes everything. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this long before modern psychology did. He said, "There are no facts, only interpretations." But he didn't mean this as a dismissal of reality. He meant it as a wake-up call, that what you think you're seeing, whether in a stranger, a lover, or your own reflection, is never the full story. It's a moment, a fragment, a performance. People are not objects to be solved. They are processes unfolding. They are questions still being asked. This is not a flaw. It is their freedom and yours. Because once you abandon the myth of fixed identities, you realize something profound. To read someone is not to trap them in understanding. It is to liberate them through presence. It is to witness their becoming without needing to complete their sentence. It is to stop asking, "Who are you?" and start asking, "Who are you becoming right now? And how can I meet you there?" This changes everything. Every conversation becomes alive. Every interaction becomes sacred. You begin to listen, not for confirmation, but for emergence. You no longer seek to grasp others, but to dance with them, because you know that by the time you've defined them, they've already changed. But that realization carries a mirror. If others are becoming, so are you. And here comes the most dangerous insight of all. You've never truly known yourself. What you've called me is a collage, assembled from childhood echoes, cultural scripts, wounds dressed up as preferences, and dreams borrowed from the media. You thought your personality was solid, that your desires were yours, that your fears were evidence of truth. But what if they were just artifacts? What if the self you've been defending your whole life was a placeholder, a mask you forgot you were wearing? What if, beneath all of it, you are not a self, but a field of potential? Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz and architect of logotherapy, said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose, and in that choice lies our freedom." That space, that breath between reaction and action, is your soul. It is the place where identity is still fluid, where you can become something new. You can become the kind of person who doesn't just read people, but who awakens them. Because when you stop projecting, when you stop reducing, when you stop needing others to fit your expectations, something magical happens. People feel seen, and when they feel seen, they begin to see themselves. And when they see themselves, they begin to change. You become a catalyst, not through force, but through presence. And in that way, you become dangerous, not to others, to the old order, to the mechanized culture of consumption and status and control that thrives on misunderstanding, division, and shallowness. You become someone who cannot be manipulated by surface impressions, someone who cannot be sold false promises, someone who cannot be seduced by power dressed in charisma. Because you see beneath the mask, beneath the performance, beneath the fear. And so you move through the world with a rare kind of grace, a terrifying kind of grace. Because when others are strategizing, you are perceiving. When others are judging, you are listening. When others are reacting, you are choosing. This is the power Nietzsche pointed to, not the power to dominate, but the power to create, to transcend the inherited scripts and shape something original, to become an artist of perception, an architect of reality. Because here's the final paradox. The deeper you see into others, the more invisible you become. not in a depressing sense, in a liberating one. You no longer need to be seen to feel real. You no longer need to be understood to feel valid. You no longer need the world to reflect you back, because your awareness is its own light. You become the observer who does not distort, the presence that invites authenticity, the silence in which truth speaks. And so you disappear in the best possible way. You stop being the center. You become the space. And in that space, the world comes alive. Others unfold. Stories bloom. Truth breathes. You are no longer trying to read people like puzzles to solve. You are sitting in the sacred fire of their unfolding, unafraid, unhurried, unchanged. And that is the ultimate truth. The greatest way to read someone is not with analysis, but with reverence, to behold them like a storm, like a forest, like something wild and sacred and changing. And once you see them that way, you begin to see yourself that way. Not a brand, not a diagnosis, not a persona, but a living question, a dangerous becoming. And from that place, everything becomes possible. You become free, not because you've mastered perception, but because you've transcended the need to master at all. You become sovereign, not because you dominate others, but because you are no longer dominated by your misreadings of them. You become powerful, not through force, but through clarity. And that clarity changes rooms. It heals, it disarms, it liberates. So now you stand at the edge of a different life. A life where you don't just look at people, you see them. A life where you don't just react, you respond. A life where every moment is an invitation to go deeper, to stay open, to remain awake. It is not an easy life, but it is a true one. And that is the rarest thing of all. Welcome to your new vision, not one that controls, but one that awakens.